Today's guest is Jodie Atkinson. She is a certified advanced grief recovery specialist, speaker, author, and entertainer. Her debut book, Have You Met My Grief, not only serves as a written work, but also has been transformed into an award-winning cabaret show that premiered at the 2023 Adelaide Cabaret Fringe Festival. Following a profound personal loss, she became acutely aware of her own lack of preparedness to handle grief. She felt this was largely due to society's reluctance to openly discuss the topic of grief. Driven by a deep passion to help others dealing with grief, Jodie wrote a book on the subject. Furthermore, she has pursued certification in the very program that aided her in navigating her own loss, all with the intention of extending that assistance to others. Jodie actively engages in writing and presenting to offer support to those struggling with grief, as well as their families, friends, and colleagues. She takes part in speaking engagements for various community groups and takes the lead in orchestrating programs and workshops tailored for both individuals and groups, addressing a wide range of losses. Jodie, welcome. Thank you so much for being on the show with me today.
Thank you for having me, Maryanne. It's a pleasure.
Jodie, are you able to share and talk about the chain of events that led you on this journey?
I am, yes. So I didn't always work in this space. I had a fairly broad career history, but I guess before I became involved in the grief space, I was working in running my own health and fitness business, and I was quite happy. I had a good life. I felt like I knew my place in the world, and life was really good. And then in 2019, the life as I knew, world as I knew it, shattered. I had been with my husband for 14 years, and he was a healthy, fit, active man. He was 52, and he was experiencing some back pain, which wasn't unusual for him because on and off over the years, we all get little aches and pains here and there. But this one was different because it didn't resolve with the usual ways that he would seek to do that, like, massaging or some chiropractic treatment or even physio. And then some sort of strange indigestion developed, and he went off to the doctor and obviously had that conversation. We ended up going to see a second doctor and getting a second opinion, who was a little bit more thorough with their examination process. And a scan picked up that he had pancreatic cancer, and he was stage 4 before we knew he was even sick. Apart from those mild, those symptoms, which are quite general. So we had no idea. And then we were told with treatment he would have 6 to 8 months. So he decided he wanted to pursue that. And it just was such a brutal, and it deteriorated so quickly that he died just 37 days later. So we barely got used to the idea that he was sick, and he was gone.
Within 37 days.
Yep.
I mean,
yep.
that is heartbreaking, and I'm so sorry, to hear that. That must have been a shock, not just to you, but for your family and his as well.
Oh, everybody. Yeah, it was, it just seemed like surreal. Like, how could this be happening? He's fit, he's healthy, he's active, he eats well, he works out nearly every day, leads a pretty clean lifestyle, How is this happening? It's just, mind-boggling. But yeah, it is a silent cancer. It can be quite aggressive. And speaking with other people who have had similar experiences with pancreatic cancer, they presented with similar symptoms to Craig. So I guess it's timely to mention that, like, November, we have got a pancreatic cancer fundraising event happening. So it's timely to sort of have the conversation around that, because that's going to be here in Adelaide in November. But the Put Your Foot Down walk, which is about raising funds for pancreatic cancer, because, it is a silent, aggressive cancer. It isn't one that has huge stats in terms of survivor rates. So it's just around 10% will survive after 5 years, and most will die within the first year that they're diagnosed.
I mean, that's pretty unbelievable. I have had family members with various types of cancer, but not pancreatic cancer. I had no idea that it was that aggressive.
Yeah, it can be. Yes. There are people out there that are living with the disease, and, but it is, like I said, it's around about 10% that will survive after 5 years.
Yeah. I mean, I can't even imagine how you would even start to reconcile that grief, for it to happen so quickly. Look, where do you even start there?
Yeah, good question. for me, I felt like my world just shattered. Grief for me showed up in the form of panic attacks, fear, and anxiety. And one minute I'd be foggy and like disconnected from everything. And the next minute I'm having a raging panic attack. And I thought I was going mad. I thought I'm losing my mind. I've lost him and now I'm losing my mind. And I really struggled. I've never been one to have panic attacks. I've never had severe anxiety. I've never been scared to leave my house. I've never been worried about being out in public and then suddenly feeling this overwhelming urge to get in my car and get home as quick as I can. It was not what I expected. I don't know what I expected, but not that. And it was horrible. It was horrendous. I didn't want to go back to work because I didn't trust myself to stand in front of a class and instruct people through a 45-minute exercise routine. Like I can't do it. I just lost the ability to function. My sense of identity, my purpose, everything just like obliterated.
And so what happened next? So when you're having these panic attacks and this anxiety, what did you do?
I said to my mum, I need help. Like I said, I can't deal with this by myself. And quite honestly, if this is my life now, I don't want to be here doing this because I don't want to be living like this. It's nuts. It's scary. Everything about my world just changed. So I did seek some counselling support and it was a quite horrendous experience. It wasn't something that I would ever want anyone to go through. I went there feeling quite vulnerable, fragile. I've, explained what's going on. And the person that I saw did not give me any eye contact, fidgeted with things on their desk, basically told me after about half an hour, well, time's up. And their parting words to me were along the lines of, you can't out drink it. You can't out drug it. You can't out do this. You can't do that. You just have to get through it. And I rushed out of there, got in my car and just howled my eyes out. I felt worse off for having that experience. And by the time I composed myself enough to be able to drive home, when I did arrive home, my family said, how did you go? And I just said, I never want to go through anything like that again. I feel worse off for having had that experience. And if I can't get help, what am I going to do? Because I'm feeling, quite desperate at this point. And one day, the palliative care nurse that had looked after Craig and I contacted me. She said, "Oh, how are you going?" And I told her, and she said, "Well, why don't we get some counselling for you after Craig, down the track a little bit?" And I just said, "No, I want it now." Like after the funeral, I think it was a few days before the funeral, she rang me, and I said, "I want to go. Like, get me someone now."
And so was that the modality that you're trained in now and certified in? Is that what you started with initially?
No, no, no. So the second person that I worked with from palliative care was a social worker, and I worked with him for a few months, and he was lovely, very supportive over the phone. Never ever met this person, wouldn't know what they look like at all, but such a beautiful rapport and supportive sessions with him over the phone. But unfortunately, he had to return back to the organisation that he was on loan from. He was sort of in an acting position, I believe. So our time ended and I felt like a little life raft just sliced off and left to drift, I mean, there was a handover with someone else, but the rapport wasn't there. I felt like I was, oh, well, you're making good decisions, you're backing yourself and off you go type thing. But I was far from ready for that. And the program that I certified in, I actually had never heard of before, the grief recovery method. And it was just stumbled across it on social media one morning, actually Father's Day of 2019. And I just was like, what is this? So I Googled it and up came all this information about it. How do I not know this exists? Like, how is it I'm just finding out about this now? It was really, really good to find something that aligned with how I felt, what I believed, what I was looking for. And it spoke to me on a level that nothing else did.
I mean, how incredible that you came across that, because there are a lot of people who don't have that opportunity, who don't know that these programs exist, and they are drifting along sort of aimlessly in the wind, if you will, trying to hold on to something to help them cope through. And it's amazing that you did find that program, and obviously now you found that to be your purpose and part of your mission, which is so incredible. But I mean, grief is a normal and natural reaction to any kind of loss, but there are conflicting feelings caused by the end, isn't there? And a change in the dynamics and a change in behavior. Is that something that you're noticing with the people that you're helping? And is that something that you noticed within yourself, even though you knew, obviously you would have been told that things were declining at a rapid rate. Even knowing at the beginning that there might have been 8 months, 6 to 8 months with your husband, the grief ultimately starts from there, doesn't it?
It does, because your world has changed. So you hit the nail on the head, because grief isn't just about death and divorce. Like, most people associate those two life events with, oh, you're grieving the loss of that. But grief is the loss of, like, all the conflicting feelings that you would have at a change in or end of a familiar pattern of behavior.
Yeah.
Now, a familiar pattern of behavior is a relationship. It's our job. It's going to school every day. It's a particular way of life. And a global pandemic shut down our regular, pattern of behavior real quick. And the world grieved. People may not have realized what the feelings were, but it was grief because it was loss of, our autonomy and our individuality, our ability to do what we do every day, and with the freedom that we not took for granted, but we just had. And suddenly we're being told, stay in your house, don't go out, but go only 5 kilometers, don't dance, don't do this, and it just felt so foreign. So when you're told you've got a terminal diagnosis, there is the hopes, dreams, and expectations of a life that is now not going to happen. You don't have time to do the things you might have been thinking of doing in the future. And it's the change in the dynamic of your relationship. It's planning for something completely unforeseen that's, ultimately with a terminal diagnosis, you're faced with your mortality. So it is scary. And it was pointed out to me, I was grieving before Craig passed, because I'm grieving what we had lost already in that short period of time, like the deterioration in his health, watching him unable to do the things that he could do 2 weeks ago, being able to get up and take the dog for a walk every morning, and then suddenly struggling to put a dish in the dishwasher. Yes, I was grieving. He would have been grieving too.
Of course. And there's a difference between grief and mourning, isn't there?
Interesting. I think grief, there are a lot of labels that come with grief and bereavement. And, you'll find people might even put time frames to those things, to those labels. And I think it can get a bit tricky. For me personally, I put this in my book, so this is just my view that I'm sharing. But I think when you put a label and a time frame on something, you lock into it. Whereas if you just are allowed to express how you feel and what's going on, and someone acknowledges that that's what you're feeling, and you're able to kind of move through that in your own way and pace and time, it doesn't kind of define you. So whether you're mourning or grieving, like, I think it's up each to their individual, like, to be what their emotional truth is. So for me, yeah, I don't love labels from that perspective. And I've heard so many people say that they thought they were grieving wrong because they didn't follow a particular process or go through a particular stage and things like that. And I think grief's hard enough as it is without throwing all that on top and feeling like you're not getting it right, Yeah.
Of course. I mean, grief isn't linear, is it? It can stop at the start. It can happen at random times, usually at inappropriate times where you don't want to be crying, but that's when it happens. There have been times, even personally, I've been putting on my makeup, and because that's when my brain is quiet and I'm concentrating, it's the only time that I'm really, like, in the focus zone, that then I start thinking about things, and I'm usually having some sort of meltdown, when I've been in those stages of grief. That's usually when things would kickstart for me, and I'd be like, no, I don't have time for this.
Yes. But grief doesn't play like that, does it? Right?
No, it doesn't. No.
And I mean, I'm glad you raised that, because I think I have heard where people have said, I dedicate some time to sit and be in my grief each day and allow myself to feel my feelings, because I've got too much stuff to do and I can't, and that's great if that's where you're at. And I guess it depends where you're at in relation to the intensity and the proximity of the loss and all of that. But I think, you can be just putting on your makeup or hear a song on the radio or smell some familiar smell, or you're flicking through photo albums or photos on your phone, and suddenly there's a photo that takes you back in time, and you may have an emotional reaction to that. It can throw you completely under a bus, you know, where you think I'm having a good day today, and then boom, something happens, and you know, the next thing you know, you say, you know what, I'm shutting up shop today. I'm going home and I'm getting under that doona.
Yeah.
I'm just, you know.
And giving yourself that grace to do that as well, I think is so important. Is there like a best time for someone to start dealing with their grief? You know, you were talking about there is no right way or wrong way. It's about, you know, really embracing and acknowledging your feelings and being with your feelings. But do you feel like people need to give themselves some space before they start trying to work through their grief? Or is it better that, you know, the sooner the better?
Each to their own. With grief recovery, we say that it's never too soon to heal your heart. Like if you feel that that's what you need to do. But I will say that quite often we're told give it time, or time will heal all wounds. But time on its own just ticks past. And, you know, there are people out there who are grieving something that happened a long time ago, and something recent happens that kind of throws it back on top of unhealed or unresolved grief from a previous experience. So yeah, being very mindful of not telling people that time will heal wounds, time without taking some form of action. And to put it in context, if you fell over and broke your leg, I'm not going to tell you to go and just give it time and have a sit down and it'll get better over time. You know, you'd go and get it looked at, x-rayed, maybe put in plaster. Yeah. And if I saw you cut yourself in the kitchen, you know, making a meal, I wouldn't say, well, just, you'll be right. Like, just, you know, wait a day or two and see what happens. You know, you'd get a band-aid, or you might need stitches. But because grief is internal, we don't see the wound as such. And telling someone to give it time is just like telling someone with a physical injury that similar kind of thing. It needs attention.
It does need attention. So, what about anticipatory grief? You know, when you know something is looming. So, say, you know, with like, say, an 8-month prognosis, you know, or even 2 years or whatever it is, sometimes people have that anticipation in the lead up can be quite full on, can't it? I mean, I'm noticing within my family unit, we've got 2 elderly people in our family, and they are in and out of hospital, and sometimes multiple times during the week, in and out of hospital. And every time, you know, I can see my mum, you know, she like is holding her breath because there's a worry. Is this it? Is this going to be it now? And it isn't, and that hasn't been for like 3 or 4 years. You know,
Yeah. Yep.
they're doing a great job of keeping on going, but that anticipation of it can be quite terrifying, can't it?
It is a terrifying period of time because everything changes, like from, you know, certainly with Craig's situation, my husband's situation, like, you know, every time we sat in a doctor's office, it was a different thing to deal with. You know, it wasn't like, oh, we can hear that news, process it, work through it. Oh no, this is happening now. Oh, so change, you know, it's just chopping and changing. You can never keep up with it. And I actually said it felt like a deadly game of chess. Every move we made, cancer was like, nah, check, you know, and then it was checkmate, you know, done. And everything we tried, every direction we tried, every bit of advice we took on, it was like we just get cut off at the pass every time. So not only are you grieving the lost opportunity that might have been there, you're now faced with a new outcome or a new direction, and then you deal with that. You think you're going down that track, and then suddenly it's like, no, that's game plan's changed again, and you just, yeah, it just feels like you can't actually get on top of it or get in front of it or just get some level of normality.
And that makes so much sense, of course. Like how do you even stay sane during that kind of period? You're kind of like holding your breath the whole time, right?
It feels like that. Yeah, I think. I mean, I got asked a question the other day. I said, I honestly can't remember, because Craig, he was quite private out of the 2 of us. He was the more reserved, and he didn't want the whole world to know what he was going through. So we kept the news pretty close and didn't tell anyone beyond close friends and family. And so, you know, I had to tell people at work because I had to stop. I had to cancel classes at the last minute, which, you know, without a reason, that would be annoying. But they understood that there was medical appointments and things like that. So they were more understanding and supportive. But again, very limited in the information shared. So I don't think people really knew until, you know, he was sort of that last few days beforehand that I actually told a couple of my friends what was going on, because I knew, like, I'm going to need support.
Of course.
I'm going to need people to be there for me when, you know, when it happens, because I'm just fully invested in being there for him.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, of course. I think that's a good call to make. And I think it's important for people in those circumstances to do that and to trust that, people are going to be able to hold that space so they can grieve in the way that they're supposed to, and they don't have to think about doing anything other than just receiving that love and care. So critical.
It's a good point though, too, Maryanne, because like sometimes people don't know how to ask for help.
Yeah.
Right? Some people don't know how to reach out. So educating society that when someone's grieving, like reach into them because sometimes they don't know. And people say, I'm here if you need me, sing out if I can do anything. But sometimes people in that space, they don't know what they need. They don't know what they want. They don't know how to ask for that. And being really mindful of the fact that sometimes it is just about turning up and saying, I'm here. No need to say too many words. It's just about showing up and saying, I'm here.
Yeah, and also, some people feel shame because they don't want to be a burden. There's like all sorts of other different thought programs that are coming with, I don't want to ask for this help. I don't want to, they're sick of hearing me talk about this. I think everyone's experienced that to a degree. And it also forms like part of our culture in Australia too, doesn't it? Like where people just don't feel like they can talk about their feelings. And then if they do, sometimes it is out of balance because they want to stay in that victim mode. So there's no action. It's quite a messy landscape here, whereas when you look at America, everyone's got a therapist, everyone's in there, so it's kind of a bit easier. Their culture is, you're a weirdo if you don't have a therapist there, whereas here it's kind of like, oh no, you should be right, it's fine. And it's like that is so not the case, because you could see in the behaviors that they're
Yes.
not, and the way that they're acting out and the things that they're reaching for, like alcohol and drugs and food and whatever else is going, or over exercising and all of those things. You can see people aren't coping, but that's, instead of asking for help, they're doing that instead.
Yeah.
And it's a real shame.
You're absolutely right. Like some cultures do grief really well. Like the whole community grieves together and extended time. Like it's not like it might be a week or something, but you openly show your emotion for what's happened. We've got some stuff to learn here. We can learn from these cultures that really know how to grieve the passing of someone. So it is interesting when you look at different cultures and where did ours come from? And I think there is that thing about the generations around boys don't cry or men don't show emotion or stiff upper lip, and you've got to be strong. That's another one. Like people will often say, you just got to be strong. And I often hear people say, I need to be strong for my family or whatever. And it's like, actually, how's that working out for you? Because the words are coming out, but it's not consistent with what's happening in the body. You're not feeling strong, and you spend all this energy trying to stay in that stoic, strong space, and your emotions just grief, like I said, it's a beast of its own. Like it will not be mastered, it will not be taught, it will not be wrangled into, you cannot organize it. It manipulates you more than you manipulate it without actually sitting and acknowledging the emotions that it's bringing up and learning what that's trying to tell you, which is, grieve, acknowledge, talk about the stuff that's left there's stuff that's unsaid, there's unmet hopes, dreams, expectations, there's all the things you're not going to be able to do, but then you're grieving all the things that you had because it was what it was, and it may not have been perfect in some cases. It might have been a very volatile relationship. It might have been appearing on the surface to the outside world that it wasn't a harmonious relationship, but there's still grief there because it's never going to be better than what it was now that's passed. So regardless of what type of relationship that it was, there's grief there. And the other thing you said about the exercising and the smoking and the drinking, anything in excess is not good, right? But we do these things to try and distract ourselves from how we're feeling. They work short term, they have a place, but they're not really, how much ice cream can you eat before you realize that the answer's not at the bottom of the bucket.
Absolutely. Yeah, of course. Just coming back to the culture side of things, I 100% agree. There is plenty for us to learn from other cultures. I've got a Greek background, and so the funeral process and that grieving process is so intense. It is not a light and breezy celebration. Like I've been to people who are, Christian and Catholic and all sorts of different things, and it feels lighter, but the Greek process it feels so heavy. It feels like it's a bit too much in a way. It doesn't feel as balanced, but there's an opportunity, because everyone is in that state all together, that you kind of like, there is a benefit because you do get to just be sad in a really intense kind of way. and then you start to feel that lightness. So
Mm.
it's not like in dribs and drabs. It's just you're sort of pummeled in here and there's no real celebration of that person. It's just sadness. That's it, and I feel like there's components of different cultures that we can take and make our own. And the more open we are about how we're feeling about things, and the more open we are about, what we can do to better support each other, I think that's where we start with that side of things. I think that's going to aid and abet, rather than it being, no, this is like how we have to do that. Because when I think about myself, like when I think about myself passing, I don't want them to be so sad like that. Oh, they will be sad. I hope, no, they will
I
be
know.
sad. Of course,
Yeah.
I kind of hope that they are not
You're
celebrating that I'm
fabulous.
dead, not
Of
not
course,
like dancing on my grave or anything like that. Just bringing some lightness in. But
it's true. There will be people that would, they're gonna have their feelings,
yeah,
regardless of whether, the
yeah.
person's laughing at the funeral or they're crying their
Yeah.
heart out. Like, yeah.
Each circumstance is different. Some of the time, people don't have a chance to say goodbye, and there's a lot of different components that make things more challenging around the grief process. But what you were saying about, grief not being just about death, grief is about the loss of a relationship, whether they've passed or not. That resonates so strongly with me, because I at one stage I had 4 miscarriages, and I split up with my ex-husband, and even though that relationship was terrible and toxic, there was so much grief that I was unpacking, and I didn't get any. I started having kinesiology, which is so similar, it's sort of parallel, because then I wanted to pay that forward. And so then I started helping people. I trained as a kinesiologist and started helping people in that way. So that we do have that in common. And there's a lot of healing that comes with being of service in that way. Do you find that has helped you with your grief, because you're hearing these stories and it's helping you heal components of you that may have been lost in that space?
I think so. I'm a very visual person. Like I like analogies, right? So for me, it was like I fell in this massive hole that I didn't know existed. And when Craig died, I suddenly found that there's this chasm and I fell in it. I was able to pull myself out of there. Like I recognized my need for support and help, and I threw everything at it, because I just thought I can't live like this. I just can't continue to live in this horrific, tumultuous, volatile emotions and unpredictability. And I didn't want to just walk out of the hole and think, you know what, there's going to be people coming in and falling in after me. And I can walk away and just go, well, that's what happens. But that doesn't feel right to me. That hole exists. You've got to do something to either smooth it over or stand on the side and pull people out. You can't take their grief away from them. You can't outsource it, but you can hold their hand and help them navigate their own grief. And that for me was what this was about. I just thought, now that I know that this is a thing, I can't just let other people find out like this. It just doesn't feel right. So wanting to be there to support people to go, you know what, I know it's scary. I know it's hard. I know there are days where you just think, I stop the world. I want to get off and I can't take it away, but I can sit here with you and I can listen.
And talking to someone that might not be involved in your circumstance helps a lot, doesn't it?
Having a bit of distance, yeah. And
But
I would never say to anyone under any circumstances, like, I know how you feel, because I don't. I know how I felt at the time, but I don't know your situation or the next person's situation. I don't know the feelings they've got. And people will often say to me, you know how I feel because you've been through this. It's like, I know how I felt. I don't know how you felt. And I'm not going to even try and even consider that I would, because you have a unique relationship with each person on this planet. And you might be, one person who is a mother, a daughter, a sister, an aunt, a neighbor, a friend, a teacher, a mentor. They've got all these relationships, and everyone they're connected to is going to have some form of grief when that relationship ends, but no one knows how each other are feeling.
yeah.
Telling someone how they feel, you don't.
No, and I think it's easy just to say that because you don't know what else to say, but that's not really providing the other person with any comfort, and again, and that falls into all sorts of different things: breakups,
Yep.
miscarriages, death, job losses, whatever it is.
Yep.
COVID, you don't,
Everything.
that the other person doesn't really know what you're dealing with. When you look at COVID specifically, that created so much grief for so many people. I was living in Melbourne, so I went through the first lockdown. I can say with full honesty and truth that I wouldn't have made it that second year. My heart just wouldn't have been able to take it. I barely made it out, to be honest. I was like fighting my way out of that space, and it took like, I felt like a year, maybe 2 years, for me to start to feel normal. And even though there were other people that I see and meet that are from Melbourne or living in Melbourne, they say, I know how you feel. They don't, because a lot of people weren't in my circumstances, and they
Correct.
didn't experience the trauma and my history either, which was perpetuating the whole thing. The abandonment, the loneliness, that loneliness, because I was living on my own. I didn't have any pets. There was no, partner. There was nothing, and I couldn't even see any friends. And a lot of people weren't in those circumstances, but a lot of people were. And even those people, I can't say that I knew how they were feeling, because I don't know their history and I don't know what trauma they've had in the lead up to that. That's making and exacerbating those circumstances. So I think it's an easy go-to say that to someone else. And I'm sure I've said that to other people without thinking. But in this conversation, it's building awareness. It's
Yeah,
building
that's
awareness
right.
of how we communicate and how we can just acknowledge and just listen rather than just trying to relate. I think that's so important.
It is important. I just want to say, look, I really feel for you being in that situation and having an awareness that isolation is not great for people. And that was one of the reasons, like becoming an advanced, grief recovery specialist, was I could do this online. So people couldn't come and see me face to face, or I couldn't go and see them, but we could get online and we could do this type of thing, which was massive. Because how do you have grievers sitting in their homes, isolated, trying to make sense of, A, maybe job loss, B, they're dealing with a relationship breakup, or they are in a relationship that is already, volatile potentially. You've got people locked down together who may not be working so well. And then people, for whatever reason, it is really affecting them. How do we connect with these people if we can't see them? So being able to get online and talk to people and communicate and say, I'm here, I can hear you, like, let's talk this out. Let's look at what we can do rather than what we can't do.
For sure. And some of those people had all of those circumstances: the job
Correct.
loss, a volatile relationship, a relationship breaking down, dealing with kids, like all the things. I mean, I would never know how to relate to someone on that level, because that wasn't my experience.
Yeah.
That sort of leads me to my next question. We've got some quite significant, strong world circumstances going on at the moment. We've got wars happening. We've got, the COVID thing and all the other different agendas that go on that are creating devastation and that's probably the easiest word to use, devastation, because it is in different ways. I'm assuming that you've seen a significant increase in the amount of people that are coming to you trying to work through their grief. Have you noticed that a significant change, or do you feel like things are sort of same?
For me, look, I talk to people all the time about loss, grief of all sorts. And the one thing I will say is find something that aligns with you. Like, I offer a program that I found life-changing for me, and I wanted to provide that opportunity. But I'm not saying that, don't do this therapy, don't do that, or whatever. Find what works for you and follow that through and talk to people. Some people connect to their faith. Some people, will go and do like bereavement groups. They want to be in that group environment. Other people can't, think that would be the worst place to go. So recognizing what works for you is first and foremost. But I think coming back to what you're saying about, there is so much going on in the world. I think allowing ourselves to acknowledge first and foremost, because I think that sometimes people go, I'm okay, I'll be fine. I've got, I'm just going through a rough patch or whatever. And we deflect it. And it might not hit for, really hit for down the track. I've heard people say, they've just seemed to be going along quite well. And then all of a sudden, 2 years later, it's when it hits. So again, grief doesn't have a method, a process, or it's unique in that way. But I think when it does present in our lives is acknowledging that, these are feelings. And I think sometimes for me, for example, I didn't know that fear, anxiety, and panic were part of grief. I do now because I've spoken to other people that have had that experience. But prior, like, I don't remember ever having a conversation with anyone about that. I saw people cry. I'd go to a funeral, people are crying, people are sad. But I didn't really know that grief can can impact that way. I mean, some of the women I spoke to when I wrote my book, I interviewed other women who'd gone through like the death of their spouse, and some were getting hooked up to cardiac machines because they thought they were having a heart attack, and it was a panic attack. And there is a thing called broken heart syndrome where the heart muscle actually does change. So there are physiological things that are going on in our body too, and grief can make us sick. If it's not resolved, it can show up in the form of infections, colds and flus, and chronic illness. It does impact our routines and the way we eat. And we do increase our smoking or drinking or, start eating food that we don't eat before, or engaging in unhealthy activities over a long period of time that become a problem. So it is something that if we don't deal with it, if we don't find a way to work through it and acknowledge it, it will, what's that saying? I think I've heard that saying, if you don't listen to your body when it whispers, you have to listen to it when it screams.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you absolutely do. Just coming back to my question, just from your perspective, have you seen an increase in the amount of people that are experiencing grief, given the way that the state of the world is, or no?
I would say there are a lot of people still experiencing the impact of what happened in 2020 with border closures and lockdowns and all that sort of stuff. I would say there is still a significant amount. I know of people who work in the mental health profession who had massive increase of people coming to them as a result of what happened. I was only just sort of starting in that space when that all happened. So, I remember being on a Zoom call with a group of business owners, and people were sharing feelings of what they were going through, and they were grieving. And when I said to them, this is what's happened, these are the word, put the normal natural reaction to loss of any kind and the pattern of behavior and going to work, and your business is shut down and you've had to turn off machines, you've had to switch off things that usually run 24/7. You could sort of see okay, I now understand what's going on here, and it's okay, and acknowledging it. So yeah, I guess from my perspective, I tend to see a lot of people that are experiencing loss in terms of death and relationship breakdown, just starting to kind of work more in the career space a little bit more now, but mainly my experience has been in the loss and relationship and death in that regard.
That makes sense.
Mm.
Jodie, do you think that grief ever ends?
That's an interesting question, isn't it? So I think, and again, this is, my opinion on this, but I think that grief it's intense and it can have that overwhelming impact, soon after something happens. And I think how people interact with their grief is going to impact what that's going to play out like. I think if you can work through it and get to a point where you can connect with your loss from a place of positivity and love rather than pain, because I think sometimes we get, locked on to, I'm connected to this and it hurts like hell and it's painful, but if I don't have this pain, what do I have? So reframing our thinking around, well, we can connect to our loss. I still feel very connected to my husband. I still very, but it's more from a place of love now. That doesn't mean that, birthdays, anniversaries and things like that don't bring up emotion, because it will. And, I sit with it and I allow myself to feel it, but I don't unpack and live there like it used to. Like, grief, I sort of talked about grief being like this external thing that came in, took over my life, shook my world up, and then overstayed its welcome until finally I got to the point where I was like, you know what? I think you can pack your bag and go now. I think I've got this. But it will come and knock on the door occasionally and say, hey, remember me? It's about that time of the year. Let's sit down and have a coffee.
Yeah.
But acknowledging that, because when I stopped fighting my grief and, I managed those panic attacks and that anxiety a lot better. But when I leaned into it, I actually started to learn a lot about myself and about grief. It does give you a perspective that you can't have any other way. So being able to embrace it and kind of learn from it and allow it to be your teacher is quite powerful. And I think that's what drives me. Why I'm so passionate about it. It's because on the other side of that is an amazing perspective and insight that only comes through going through something like that. But it's a double-edged sword. It's both great and shit at the same time. Shit that I had to go through that to get this perspective. And grief recovery doesn't mean you're recovered and you never ever feel feelings again and you never think about it again, because I don't know about you, but I didn't forget that I went to school, and I didn't forget that I got married, and I don't forget that I learned to drive a car, right? So I'm not going to forget that somebody or multiple people in my life have been here and have died. So when you think about the first day when you got your driver's license, or you think about your wedding day, or the birth of your child, or whatever, you're going to have emotions about those memories, as you will about loss. So I think it's about getting to a point where you can connect to that, but it doesn't become the, I don't know, like stop you in your tracks, pull you down, prevent you from stepping forward kind of stuff. It's being able to have those fond memories and smile and remember without feeling like suddenly it's pain riddled because you haven't worked through some of the stuff that unresolved grief will ultimately be about.
I mean,
Does that make sense?
yeah, of course it makes everything you've been saying makes so much sense. I've got like a 7 other million questions to ask you, but my next one is, how do you know someone is coping okay with their grief? Because when you look at suicide rates, when you look at people suppressing their feelings and their emotions, I mean, that's pretty rife. Like, how, as from one loved one to another, I've got people in my family who are grieving at the moment. How do I know that they're really, grieving okay and that they're working through it okay? Well, or would you ever really know?
That's a tough one, isn't it? Because, I have a very limited experience in the space around suicide. And I have spoken to people who have lost family members because they've died by suicide. And, everybody, not everybody, some people have said that people say things like, oh, did you know they were going to do that? Or did you know that was. And of course, when you think about that, what a loaded question that is. Someone's probably not going to go to work if they know that their person is thinking they're going to take some form of action to end their situation or end their life. So I think a big part of grief around that is that there's guilt that we didn't know they were going through this, or I should have known, or I should have done more. And, there's a lot of should haves in that space, and learning how to resolve some of that communication that we take on, regardless, even if, it may not be suicide, it might be some other form of death, but being able to give voice to the feelings we're feeling and the reaction that we've had to it is big part of being able to resolve grief in that regard. I talk about emotional rocks. We carry them around with us. We chuck them in the backpack and we carry it around, and it gets heavy. And learning how to put those emotional rocks down, and I mean down, not just put them in your pocket or shift them to another spot or put them on the shelf, but then put them back in the backpack a bit later on. It's literally about learning to put it down so we don't pick it up again. That's working through your stuff. And I think it's about asking, isn't it? I mean, we had Are you okay day not that long ago. I love that for awareness, but why can't we ask that question every single day?
Yeah, I have two minds about it. I think there's no depth to the question, because people will just, it's the same as how are you, and everyone just answers good.
Good.
But it's
Yeah,
99.999% of the time that is not actually the answer. But
that's right.
when you do answer with your truth, sometimes the other person, you can tell the other person's not expecting it, doesn't know what to do with it, and also in some cases doesn't even want to receive it. So I feel like, yes, we definitely need to be more mindful of our communication with others, but it's actually just being still and actually demonstrating to the other person we're ready to take in whatever they've got to say, not doing it in passing because it's just something to do, it's just something to say. I think it does bring a good awareness, but dot dot dot.
It's
There's
not a flippant comment. Yeah. And I
no.
totally agree, because the words I'm fine are the biggest lie we will hear.
Yeah, I'm good is my favorite. And I find myself saying that I'm good, and that's a total lie. Sometimes I'm not good.
Mm.
And there are other times where that is true, but I'm not good. I feel great. So it's even in the language that we use, isn't it?
It is. And I think that was, one of the things, again, like coming from lived experience, going about my day to day, people go, how are you? And I thought, if one more person does that to me, like, I scream, because it's so like, the sad pity face and the head tilt. You just think, oh, I don't want to see that. But ask me how I am. Don't assume that you know how I feel. Oh, you must be having a really hard day. It's like, actually, I was having a pretty good day today, and now I feel like I shouldn't be. But I got really honest. I just got really honest, and I do even now when people say to me, "How are you going?" You know what? I'm having a tough day today, thank you, but I'm trying. I'm here. I've turned up. Or I'm having a really good day, thank you. Or you know what? I don't feel on top of my game, but I'm still putting one foot in front of the other. So being honest about where you're at, rather than just going, yeah, I'm fine. And clearly everyone can see that perhaps, you're not as fine as you're trying to be. We in grief recovery, we call them award academy behaviors, winning behaviors, because it's like, yes, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, and then crash. So it's I think being honest is about, but being honest in a way that doesn't mean you have to sit down and have a friend counseling session for an hour. It's just like, I'm having a rough day. Like, yeah, be
And
honest about it. Own it.
and as a friend, just asking, how are you feeling today, rather than how are you, or even just changing that language, because then they're having to talk about how they feel rather than just saying I'm fine or I'm good or whatever, because you're sort of getting a little bit deeper into the conversation. And
Mm.
I think that's helpful as well. So for those people who are grieving, listening to this podcast today, what would you suggest they start with? What would you recommend as a starting point for the healing process?
I think just being honest about how you feel, like with yourself and with other people, and there will be times when you do want to be by yourself. Being around people when you're grieving can be exhausting. Like you can tire out really quickly. So it might be nice to have friends over, but don't feel that you have to sit there and endure a long, lengthy conversation to say, I'm actually feeling really tired right now. I feel like I want to have a lay down, and just communicate what you were saying before about the friend thing. If you don't have time to sit down and have a great long chat, let's schedule in a coffee later in the week and see, make time to have that conversation. So, you're still there, but it might not be appropriate to be able to do that. So, let's catch up for a coffee later on in the week, or let's go out for dinner. I think the important thing is also if someone says no, not today, no, thank you, keep asking, because one day they're going to say yes, and it will be the thing that they need on that day that is going to make the difference. It might be a walk in the park, it might be a coffee, it might be a pedicure, it might be, who knows, but it might be the thing that pulls them out of a slump that day. So a lot of people stop asking because they keep getting told no. Don't take no for an answer. Don't badger them, but just stay on there. Because one day they'll say yes. And like I said, you'll be that person that made a difference in that space. In terms of asking for help, I guess, it's important if you do go and visit someone in their home and there's coffee cups or washing or things lying around, ask before you touch them, because that coffee cup might have been the last thing their person touched before they died. And the washing in the basket might be the clothes they had on. Or so don't assume that you're just going to walk in there and start taking over, because part of the grieving process will be moving that coffee cup when that person's ready to move it. And it could sit there for 6 months, So just being mindful that when you go into the space, that to ask before you touch things.
I mean, these are things that people wouldn't. I mean, I'm just thinking about the Greek culture. The whole family comes over right then and there, and the days in the lead up to the funeral, that they're in the house. You don't even have a choice. I'm like, my head feels like, whoa, what? That's an option that you can give people a choice. About that side of things. I'm going to have
Again,
to spread the word. Yeah,
yeah, it's a thing that you learn. Like it's not
yeah,
I mean, it's in my book, but I don't know that
yeah.
it's in other people's books. But
No, I don't think it is.
because it is, like talking about, and certain things will, there's no right or wrong time to pack up someone's clothes, for example.
Yeah.
And they may want to do that by themselves. They may want help with that. But if they've still got clothes hanging in the wardrobe 6 months later, 7 months later, a year later, that's that's on their call to make that. So yeah, just being respectful of the space, I think,
Yeah.
is important. And for people grieving, I think one thing I felt really passionate about was being able to empower them with some boundaries around what they can and can't say to people when it's like, oh, just give it time, or you're like, was something I got told, you're young, you'll meet someone new one day. And it's sort of like, okay, but I don't like, I've
Wow.
just, yeah, right.
Yeah.
So being mindful of those sorts of conversations and saying, the 3 things that I came up with, that's not what I think, that's not how I feel, and that's not what I believe. Because, sometimes people will project their religious beliefs, God's plan, or it's God's will, or have faith in this, and that's great, but you've got to respect that not everyone will align with maybe your views, or they might have different spiritual or religion or different beliefs or different faith. So being mindful of, you don't have to sit there and just take everybody's stuff coming at you, because everyone's got advice. When everyone, it's a Shakespeare, everyone can cure a grief but he who has it. So it is one of those things that I think, have some boundaries, be happy to share mine. Like I said, not what I believe, not what I think, not how I feel.
Of course. And even people who are religious might be feeling really angry with their maker. Who do
Ah,
they believe in? I mean, it's quite a hurtful thing to say. I know people mean well, but it can be quite
mm.
triggering because they're trying to make peace with what's happened in their life. And that can happen to them, a person who's got the strongest faith. And one incident like that throws everything into question, and often it does.
And
And
that's another grief on top. That's a secondary loss, isn't it? Like
yeah,
sometimes you lose someone in your life dies, but you will lose friends and family as a result of that person dying. And quite often people may question their faith. This person was particularly, strong in their faith. God was the center of everything, and God made the decision to take this person away. People may feel angry about that. So they will have a secondary loss in terms of the relationships around the primary, the person that has passed away, and then, subsequent relationships around that. So, because the dynamic changes.
for sure it does. Yeah. Jodie, you are an amazing human. Your strength and your want to serve others is incredible. And I'm so grateful that our paths crossed in the most random of places.
That's amazing, though. That's the beauty of life, right?
Yeah.
We do have the light and shade.
Yeah, I mean, it is. And, I appreciate you, sharing your story and being vulnerable and helping the audience understand more about the grief process. How can the audience connect with you? How can they reach out to you if they need some help, or if they want to talk to someone about what they're experiencing or what they're experiencing within their family unit? What's the best way?
So I'm on the socials. I'm on Facebook. I've got my grief recovery page, Jodie Atkinson, grief recovery specialist. I'm also an author and entertainer. So there's the author and entertainer side as well. I have a cabaret show that I do about grief. It's named Have You Met My Grief, the same as the book. So talk a bit about this stuff in the show with some humor and some singing and some storytelling. So there's, Fringe coming up soon. So I'll be doing a couple of shows there. But I'm also on www.jodie-atkinson.com.au, and I am on LinkedIn. So I think I'm pretty easy to find. Yeah.
I think so as well. I will be sharing the links with the podcast, but I just wanted to, I just wanted you to be able to share that. Jodie, thank you so much for being on the show today and talking about how you can transmute the grief and to work through it, and how we can better support each other through that process. It's been a really important and powerful discussion today. And again, I'm so grateful that you were able to join me. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. And I've really enjoyed, some of the topics that we've explored today have been really good, and it's been really nice to be able to share some tips, I guess, for people.
Absolutely. Thanks
Yeah.
again.